Hey everybody, welcome back to MDCU News. The fourth episode of WandaVision has arrived, and boy was it juicy, so let's dig in. So the episode starts off with a flashback showing Monica reappearing after the blip, and if you turn on closed captions, you can see the background words that we hear as she reappears is actually dialogue between her and Carol Danvers and her mother that was pulled from Captain Marvel. The last line before she snaps back into reality is Carol calling her Lieutenant Trouble, her old nickname, which was a cute reference. So we see that Monica has reappeared in a hospital bed, and we later find out that she was at the bedside of her mother, Maria Rambeau, who in the years between the first and second blip has now passed away from cancer, which is a really sucky reality that Monica and likely billions of others who returned would have to deal with. But it is a necessary piece of world building that helps the audience gauge all the aftermath of the events of Infinity War, which Endgame only briefly touched on. So then Monica goes looking for her mother and encounters her old doctor amongst all the commotion. And from the way the doctor responds to Monica's presence, specifically how she very vaguely says that Monica just disappeared 5 years ago, suggests that in this time between the two blips, maybe no one knew what caused it. Was it just this massive event that everyone had to deal with without knowing the full story of? It's definitely plausible. The majority of the events of Infinity War and Endgame happened either outside of Earth or in Wakanda, so there weren't that many bystanders who could have recounted the events. And after the major amount of bad publicity the Avengers got from Civil War, I doubt they just went around telling people, hey, all of your loved ones are dead because we failed. So it's an interesting idea, which I'm sure Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which actually comes out 1 week after WandaVision ends, it'll definitely address all of these grounded elements that have to do with the blip. But moving on, we see Monica arrive at the SWORD facility, which is confirmed to be an acronym for Sentient Weapons Observation Response Department rather than Sentient Worlds Observation Response Department, as it's known in the comics. And then we're introduced to the Nick Fury kind of character of SWORD, Mr. Tyler Howard, who reveals that Maria Rambeau was in fact the founder of SWORD, very similar to how Peggy founded S.H.I.E.L.D. And he also states that Monica came back to work 3 weeks after the blip, which finally reveals that WandaVision is occurring within the same exact month as the final battle of Endgame, which I have to say, poor Wanda has been having a tough month. Like, this month is not her month, and from the looks of it, it's only going to get tougher with the events of this show. And so this 3 week detail, it also places the events of WandaVision before the things that we see in Spider-Man Far From Home, which was confirmed to be around 8 months after Endgame. Now, this is crucial because it shows that whatever else is in store for the rest of WandaVision can't be all that world changing like some have assumed, because then it would have been addressed in Spider-Man. So it's likely that rather than a huge reality warping event, WandaVision will probably end up with a singular moment that acts as a catalyst for a crazier multiverse type of thing to be explored throughout the rest of the multiverse saga, which might explain why Maria Hill stated that Doctor Strange was unavailable in Spider-Man Far From Home. But back to SWORD. Howard revealing that SWORD was founded by Maria Rambeau far enough into the past that Monica grew up within the organization made me wonder why we've never seen them having anything to do with any of the major events for the past 12 years. But then Monica talks about the astronauts program, and Howard says that she's grounded to terrestrial missions only. And also that things have changed in space since she's last been up there. That tells us that SWORD is largely a space-based organization dealing with extraterrestrial intel, threats, and allies, which Monica mentioned, likely referring to the Skrull, possibly even Talos' daughter, who she befriended back in Captain Marvel. But now that astronaut program that Monica mentioned, it's likely the peak, SWORD's Outer Space HQ, which is where we see the real Nick Fury back in the post-credit scene for Far From Home. So then Howard tells Monica that she's grounded and will be assigned to this missing persons case in Westview. She then asks whose protocol this is and finds out that it was actually her mother who established this procedure for missing persons, which makes sense because Maria would have had first-hand experience with missing people coming back from her time with Carol Danvers back in Captain Marvel. So Monica then goes to carry out her mission where she meets Agent Wu, who does the same card trick that he learned from Scott back in Ant-Man 1 and tells her that they stumbled upon the reality bubble because they had a witness in the witness protection program who had suddenly vanished and all of his contacts acted as if they never knew him. And first off, this begs the question of which one of the residents in Westview is this mysterious witness? Personally, my guess is that it was the mailman, which would explain that weird interaction him and Agnes had back in episode 2 where he says, "Don't shoot, I'm just a messenger." Probably a reflection how in real life he was a messenger or an informant for the FBI. And secondly, this detail now shows us that this reality bubble has been able to go on this long without raising any flags because the same type of power that keeps everyone inside brainwashed as a sitcom character has also caused everyone related to them on the outside of the bubble to completely forget that they or even the town of Westview exists, which we see with these two cops who most likely worked in Westview but were kicked out and brainwashed to believe that they worked in the fake town of Eastview, which shows the answer to Vision's question of whether the neighborhood watch works with local law enforcement is in fact no, because there is none in Westview. And on the sign of Westview, we see that the town has a population of roughly 3,000 people, which definitely does not add up since we've only seen about 20 residents or so inside the bubble so far. But more on that later. Then we see Darcy Lewis, an astrophysicist and close friend of Jane Foster and Thor, who we were introduced back in Thor 1. She's been brought on by SWORD to consult on the reality bubble, and when she gets back to the base, she asks for a cup of coffee, and I just know that this has to be a reference to the coffee scene in Thor 1, but also maybe not, who knows. So next we see Darcy use this swanky science equipment, and it gets a reading of high levels of CMBR, or cosmic microwave background radiation, from the reality bubble. And just a side note, this is actually a real cosmological phenomenon, and it seems to be the new label for Wanda's energy, because as we saw from Doctor Strange, Marvel Studios prefers to give a shred of scientific explanation behind what is normally called magic in the comics. And Wanda's energy, which is upholding the reality bubble, being CMBR, makes a lot of sense, since Howard says that this energy is associated with the Big Bang. And as Wong back in Infinity War described, the Infinity Stones came from the Big Bang, and Wanda got her powers from one of the Infinity Stones, so it seems that the Infinity Stones themselves may just be highly condensed and matterized forms of this CMBR. And speaking of the levels of radiation, Darcy says that it's safe for now, which implies that it may be expanding, which we have seen suggested by some of the trailer footage. Next, we meet this agent who's referred to as Franklin, who's being sent into this reality through the sewers. And once he breaches a barrier, we see again that this barrier changes whatever passes through it into the closest thing that can act as a prop for the sitcom reality. With the drone we saw earlier, it turned into a toy. With Monica, she became the background character of Geraldine. And of course, the agent in the hazmat suit turns into a beekeeper. So then Darcy is finally able to recognize some of the frequency as broadcast and sets up an old TV set which allows SWORD to watch what's going on inside and start trying to identify some of the residents. And from Norm's profile sheet, who's Vision's co-worker, it says that Norm expressed concern for his father and sister when Vision awakened him. Now this confirms the detail earlier that there must be more residents in Westview that Wanda or perhaps someone else is holding hostage or something to force the residents to cooperate. Also, saying that Vision awakened him suggests that Vision may have been doing some late night investigation without Wanda knowing. And on Jimmy Woo's whiteboard, he notes some of the same questions that most of us have been asking, like why hexagonal shapes, which I addressed in my episode 3 breakdown, why sitcoms, and whether the events that they're watching are happening at the same time in space. And then if you zoom in close to the left-hand side of the screen, you can also make out that the board asks who's behind this, and has scrolls with question marks right under the question. And this tells us that SWORD, as an organization, is aware of the existence of scrolls, which would make sense since both Maria and Monica knew of them. But it also plays right into my theory about how WandaVision is setting up Captain Marvel 2, so make sure you check that video out. So then we see on the other side of Jimmy Woo's message into Westview, and how to the SWORD agents it appears that this plan failed because the TV set cuts this out from playing, which happens again later in the episode, making Darcy notice that someone has to be censoring the film. And my guess is that it's Agnes, and that she's aware that SWORD is trying to get to Wanda, but is trying to deter them from her, which supports another one of my theories that I talk about in episode 3's breakdown, so definitely check that out, because the cards are starting to point to me being right. Okay, so then we get to see more of the notorious Wanda v Monica scene, where Wanda calls Monica out, saying she's a stranger and an outsider, and sends Monica flying out of Westview. And for a second afterwards, we see Wanda hesitate, as if she just came out of a daze, which I'm guessing is because she is under some sort of control that she put herself under, or someone else put on her, that allows her to fix any errors that may be happening, but also stay blissfully oblivious when she wants to. And then we get to the creepiest scene of the show so far, Dead Vision, which must be some PTSD flashback Wanda's having, and once she shakes that image of him, she states that they can't go anywhere else, hinting that Vision can only be alive within this pocket reality. And she says that she has everything under control, which is a beautiful parallel to Monica, who now, outside of the bubble, tells Wu that it's all Wanda, it's all Wanda. Now, this episode was a huge turning point because this show has 9 episodes, and the showrunners have said that it's shot like a typical Marvel movie, which is formatted into 3 acts. Now, using that template, episode 4 is the beginning of the second act. And notice how in the first act, the show gave the general vibe that, ooh, Wanda's a victim and being controlled. But in episode 3, the last episode of Act 1, it flipped the script and showed that she was more of a villain than we thought. Thus, I'm guessing Act 2 is now going to explore Wanda as the villain, but once again flip the script on us in either episode 5 or 6, showing us that although she is in control, she may not be fully to blame, but is in fact being edged on by yet another, more dangerous villain like Mephisto, which the last act will explore and bring a conclusion to, thus setting off the Multiverse Saga, which if you want to know more, I also made a video about that too. So that is all for today, folks. If you enjoyed this video, or at least didn't hate it, I'd appreciate it if you dropped a like, click that tempting red subscribe button, and drop a comment telling me about any details that I may have missed from this episode. So see you guys next week.